the president hasn't done what he's supposed to do.
He knows nothing about anything.
This came from China. It should have been stopped in China.
This is not a moment for excuses or deflections or blame game.
Obamagate. It's been going on for a long time.
As long as I'm Attorney General, the criminal justice system will not be used for partisan political ends. And this is especially true for the upcoming elections in November.
Bold targets and a new blame game. As the 2020 presidential campaign heats up, Republicans and Democrats face off in what has become the most unusual U.S. presidential contest. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. With a presidential election less than 6 months away and amid a tragically deadly pandemic, Americans will have to decide who the best suited candidate is to become commander-in-chief and lead the country out of a catastrophic public health and economic crisis. With stay-at-home orders and social distancing measures having all but stopped campaign rallies and fundraisers, former Vice President Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, is struggling to bolster his online and TV presence as he remains largely confined to his residence in his home state, Delaware. Meanwhile, President Trump has used his widely watched pandemic briefings to amplify his campaign messages. And in recent days, he has also traveled to two crucial battleground states, Pennsylvania and Arizona, with another trip this week to Michigan. Facing mounting criticism from Democrats for his response to the pandemic, and with 100,000 Americans projected to die from COVID-19 by June 1st, President Trump and his Republican allies are deflecting responsibility, blaming the Obama administration and China for the crisis. And now, according to some of the latest national polls, Joe Biden is leading President Trump by 5 points. In battleground states, though, Trump has a 7-point edge. This could tilt the Electoral College, which determines the outcome of the election, rather than the popular vote. So can Biden beat Trump in November? And with Bernie Sanders out of the running, can he mobilize the young progressive base? Joining me now is Nina Turner, national co-chair of the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign and a former state senator from Ohio. Nina Turner, the Sanders supporters weren't just backing him as a candidate. They wanted to build a movement, a democratic socialist movement. Can they now fall in line behind Bernie Sanders and get themselves to back Joe Biden?
Ghida, I don't think it's about falling in line as much as it is about carrying on what this movement was about, which is changing the material conditions in the lives of people. And so certainly if the eventual or presumptive Democratic nominee, that being Vice President Biden, paints a vision that incorporates what progressives especially the Bernie-crats were fighting for, then that will give them something to vote for. This campaign in the general election cannot simply be just about beating Trump. It has to be about having a vision. The Democrats have to have a vision and also provide provision for the people who are suffering in this country. So issues like Medicare for all, canceling student debt, a Green New Deal, criminal justice reform, all of those things that were very much fundamental, the foundational points of our campaign, those things have to be lifted. And Vice President Biden has to show a willingness to push for those things.
But has he though shown that he is willing to change so much if he did become president? Because just last year he was telling wealthy donors that if he did get to the White House, nothing would fundamentally change.
Don't I know it? I used that on the campaign trail several times. And in that message, saying to wealthy donors that nothing will fundamentally change for them, the contrast to that, or the opposite of that, means that nothing will fundamentally change for the everyday average people in this country. Certainly it is my hope that through these task force and through conversations that Vice President Biden and his team will have a willingness to come on over to the progressive side. It's not necessarily coming over to the progressive side as much as this is about coming over to the right side, the more humanitarian side. And especially in the face of COVID-19, using that as the prime example, why wouldn't we have Medicare for all when we know that over 33 million people and counting have lost their jobs, and those jobs had their health care. So now the folks who've lost their jobs, they don't have health care. A lot of progressives have not seen that yet. But I hope that he will turn this around, because you got to motivate people to come out to vote. So again, it cannot be simply about what you're against. It has to be about what you are for. And so far on Medicare for all, I have not seen a willingness in him to change.
You did mention the task forces, and there have been 6 so-called unity Biden-Sanders task forces. In fact, AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is co-chairing the task force on climate change. But some people would argue that this is all window dressing, that it doesn't really tell us anything about the real power of the progressives within the Democratic Party.
Well, it remains to be seen. I am concerned, but I am also trying to be, as you probably can tell, I'm trying to be fair here and not predict the ending before they get there. Now, it is patently clear that those task forces are already stacked. I mean, there are more neoliberal types on each task force than there are progressives, but we do have some progressive leaders on there that it is my hope that when they engage, they're able to push the needle. Now, window dressing it just won't do.
Sanders, though, is really trying to urge his supporters to vote for Biden. This is what he said just a couple of days ago.
Look, I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of the people who voted for me, who supported me, will understand and do understand that Donald Trump is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. He's a pathological liar. He's a racist and a sexist, a homophobe, etc. And I think at the end of the day, they will be voting for Joe Biden.
Will the young, energetic base of the Sanders campaign vote for Biden? Is Trump becoming the unifying call here?
Vice President Biden is going to have to earn that vote. And if he wants it, then he will do the things to get that vote. You know, the beautiful thing about the younger people, the millennials and the Zs, is that they're not voting based on a blind political loyalty to a party. What drew them to our campaign, it was the issues that we were standing on, the issues that we were fighting for. And those issues are still just as important today as they were 3 months ago, even more so with the onslaught of COVID-19. Those things are, however, not mutually exclusive. In other words, we can be very clear about the danger and the threat that President Donald J. Trump is. And also, though, on the progressive left, demand that moderates and neoliberals not just talk the talk, but they use the people's power to actually push change that will change their lives. That is real, and we can do both.
But if you push for too much change, if Sanders pushes the Biden campaign too far left, some fear that he may actually not end up expanding the map and winning over the people he needs to. This is what the Trump campaign has been saying.
That's a false narrative. Let me give an example. In the states where our campaign did not win, where we were not electorally successful, exit polls showed, for example, again, one of my favorite topics, Medicare for all, that those same states, the people in those same states who voted wanted Medicare for all. When we expanded beyond the Democratic primary to just everyday Americans from all political ideology, Medicare for all polls extraordinarily high in the United States of America. And if people were not necessarily convinced during the primaries when there was competition happening, they are very much convinced right now because of the pandemic that we absolutely need political leaders elected from the Congress to the presidency who understand the suffering of the people and who are willing to be bold and visionary.
You talk about the need for boldness. Do the Bernie Sanders supporters want to see a more diverse Biden campaign? Do they want an African American as a running mate? Do they want a woman? What do you think will galvanize that base?
Well, it's not any one of those things singularly, but I think all of those things collectively. I mean, the people that I talk to particularly on the progressive left, want to see a vice president that is progressive. In other words, it's not just about the phenotype of the person, but it is also what do they believe in? What are they going to bring to the table? Are they going to stand up for the 33 million and counting? It'll be even more than that by the time we get to November. Are they going to stand up for the almost 90 million people who are underinsured and uninsured? Are they going to make requisite investments in communities that are suffering disproportionately? And quite frankly, a pandemic has always been real. The pandemic is real in the Black community, even before COVID-19. The pandemic for poor working class people of all backgrounds, they've been suffering. The suffering of the essential workers who, as you know, throughout the campaign process, when we were debating raising the minimum wage, for God's sakes, you had some folks up on that stage that did not believe that those same essential workers who are saving our lives every single day were worthy of $15 an hour. So it's not just what one looks like. Those are bonus attributes.
Sure. But who is more likely then to articulate these demands? Is it Elizabeth Warren, for example, as vice president, as a running mate? Is she more likely to galvanize the young progressives, or perhaps someone like Stacey Abrams, who would represent the African American community and is known to be quite dynamic and openly lobbying for the post?
The selection of vice president is up to Vice President Biden. I will say that person needs to be fully committed to looking at what is happening in this country and in this world, and to not equivocate on lifting the least of these in this country. They cannot be somebody that is wedded to Wall Street or the pharmaceutical industry or the oil industry. They have to be somebody that is going to stare in the face of power and say that we have to do a new thing in the United States of America and in the world. And in that type of authenticity and awareness of human suffering will be the thing that can win people over. But just having a woman or having somebody that's African American just for the sake of saying you're going to check off the box, that's not going to work.
All right. On this note, we'll have to leave it there. Nina Turner, pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
With President Trump now in full electoral mode, his campaign tactic seems to rest on a familiar playbook, accusing the Obama administration of using law enforcement to conspire against him.
This was all Obama. This was all Biden. These people were corrupt. The whole thing was corrupt, and we caught them.
In an unprecedented move last week, the White House declassified a list of officials in the Obama administration, including Vice President Biden, who made a request to reveal the identity of his former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, in intelligence reports. The names of the officials involved in Flynn's unmasking were released to a group of Republican congressmen who then handed them to the media. This follows the Justice Department's decision to drop charges against Flynn, who had pleaded guilty and was convicted on several counts, including lying to the FBI, a serious crime under the U.S. Penal Code. Now, 2,000 former Justice Department officials have also written an open letter warning that, quote, the Justice Department has once again assaulted the rule of law, unquote. The president has also fired the inspectors general of several government departments and agencies, the latest one being Steve Linick of the State Department. He was fired before concluding an investigation into an $8 billion fast-tracked arms deal with Saudi Arabia, as well as alleged wrongdoings by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Joining me now to discuss these latest developments is K.T. McFarland. She was President Trump's first Deputy National Security Advisor, serving under Michael Flynn. She's also the author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. K.T. McFarland, you've accused the FBI of setting you and Michael Flynn up in an attempt to target President Trump. You said they tried to ambush you and tried to trick you into committing crimes that you had no intentions of committing. But doesn't that omit an important fact that Flynn himself admitted to a crime? He admitted to lying to the FBI, not once, but twice.
Yes, and I would separate my reaction to the FBI and how I handled my interviews and my experience with General Flynn. I was never charged with a crime. I never pleaded guilty to anything. So I think that's a fair argument to make. But my situation is different at the back end of it. But at the front end of it, it was quite similar. I got a tap, tap, tap on the door. My Long Island house, I'd left government several months before, and it was the FBI and the Mueller investigation. And they said, can we come in? We'd like to have we would like to take some time and talk about the campaign and the transition between the election and President Trump being sworn into office. And I said, well, I didn't work on the campaign. And as far as Russians and Russian interference in the election or afterwards, that wasn't my remit. I didn't have any contact with the Russians, but I'm happy to tell you what I know.
You say you had no contact with the Russians, but in court papers, you were one of these unnamed officials within the transition team who were later identified to have worked with Flynn in coordination with the Russians.
I would say that don't put words into my mouth, because I've just said I did not have contact with the Russians. I personally did not have direct contact with the Russians. I had contact with General Flynn, and General Flynn had contact with the Russians. So I think you may think it's an insignificant difference, but actually legally it is quite a big difference.
So the court papers here, just to clarify those, say that you coordinated with Flynn his contacts with the Russian ambassador in Washington, Sergei Kislyak. But going back to the whole issue of Flynn, who, as you point out, was charged and you obviously weren't, is this attempt to defend him an attempt also by Trump and his close allies to rewrite history? Because at the time, President Trump himself said that General Flynn lied to the FBI.
You know, I think that for those questions, I'm not going to speculate on President Trump and what his motives are. I can only talk about my own. I don't really like to put words into other people's mouths, and I don't like to ascribe motivations for them. I can really only speak to my own experience. And yes, I did talk to General Flynn prior to his phone call with the Russian ambassador on December 29th, and immediately afterwards. And there was nothing wrong with my phone call. There was nothing wrong with his phone call. And it was an attempt to, on his part, to ascertain an ongoing relationship with the Russians. And when he called me back after his phone call, he said, I think things are back on track, which I assumed to mean that we were not going to have an escalatory crisis between the United States and Russia on the eve of President Trump taking office. It's not the job of the FBI or the Justice Department to get people fired. It is their job, as their charging documents show. They were supposed to find out, what did the Russians do during the election? How did they interfere? How did they do it? And I was always under the assumption that the conclusion would be, how do we then prevent the Russians or anybody else from interfering in the process of democracy and American elections going forward? That's a noble goal.
But if they suspect any wrongdoing, isn't it their job to interfere? Isn't it their job to investigate?
Yes, except for the fact that suspect any wrongdoing. Well, let's start tearing that one apart and picking it apart. It was pretty clear from testimony that has also come out in the last week before the House Intelligence Committee that the head of the CIA, the head of the FBI, and other senior officials told in closed-door classified testimony, they told the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee there was no collusion, that they knew there was no collusion, and that there was no there, shall we say. And at the same time, those same officials were going out publicly and saying to the media, to the world, well, we think Donald Trump only won because of the Russian interference. The former director of national intelligence even said he thought Donald Trump was a Russian asset. So,
well, it's easy for you to say this, though, but the other side will say just the same. I mean, the Democrats have been saying that the Attorney General and the Justice Department are being exploited and manipulated in the hands of the president to suit his own interests. And you have suggested, as have many others in Trump's close political sphere, that the unmasking of General Flynn was suspicious. But doesn't that really smack of hypocrisy? Isn't that exactly what every administration, including this one, has done?
Well, I've been in a lot of administrations, and I must say I've never seen the partisan bitter divide as great as it is now. Let me just point out one thing that struck me at the time. When General Flynn, the day, 1 or 2 days before he resigned, we got a phone call at my office in the West Wing from the Washington Post saying that they had a transcript or read a transcript of the phone call that you've referred to between General Flynn and the Russian ambassador, and they knew the contents of it. They were looking for comment on it. Now, that in and of itself, I don't think I've never read the transcript. I don't think anybody outside of the media and people in the intelligence community and perhaps senior officials in the Obama administration have seen a transcript of that call. Even General Flynn, according to press reports, has not seen a transcript of that call.
But we're looking at the unmasking. Yeah. You've said that it was suspicious, but the facts point to this. It has been done thousands of times under Obama in his last year in office. Over 9,200 times there were requests to unmask officials whose names were redacted in intelligence reports. And just in 2018, under President Trump, almost 17,000 times. So to suggest something nefarious and suspicious is really disingenuous, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. And I think that what you've implied is that these thousands of requests for unmasking, you're kind of conflating two things. One, when somebody in the mid-level of the intelligence community is doing their intelligence research, they are doing unmasking. But that's a very different thing than the Vice President of the United States or the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury to ask for unmaskings. And in addition to that, when a number of people...
Why is it different, though? Why is it different? Because you do not know who the identity of the person is.
Well, don't you find it somewhat suspicious that the people who have been asked under oath, their names were on the forms of unmasking, and they've said they don't know anything about it, that they didn't do it. That's the UN ambassador, Samantha Power, the General Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, and even Vice President Biden himself. So,
but they said they did not recall doing it. They didn't say they didn't do it. They said they did not recall that specific instance.
Look, and the fact that the 302s of General Flynn, the original FBI interview notes of General Flynn have gone missing. I mean, I look at these things objectively and think these are all very unusual circumstances. That within a very short period of time, people from the Obama administration, who at the same time that President Obama was telling President-elect Trump, not to bring General Flynn into the administration, it was at the same time there were articles and widely known within the intelligence community that General Flynn and President Trump had every intention of investigating the intelligence community, to look at their possible reforms and streamlining. So I look at those things and the unmaskings and the preemptive strike. I think it was a preemptive strike against General Flynn, and those to me look political.
The former CIA Director John Brennan has expressed his worry that instruments of governance, he says, law enforcement and justice have been manipulated. Senator Chris Murphy calls it an attempt to weaponize the judiciary. Joe Biden himself said this.
The Attorney General of the United States is not the president's lawyer. It's the people's lawyer. We never saw anything like the prostitution of that office like we see it today. It is not something the president is entitled to do, to direct either a prosecution and or decide to drop a case. That is not the president's role, responsibility, and it's a dereliction of his duty. It's what's going on is an absolute travesty, a travesty of justice.
Does he have a point?
No. He has the right to say anything he wants, but the Vice President Biden is one of the people who was at the center of this. So perhaps he has a very different motive for claiming it's political, because it was perhaps aimed at him. He was using the intelligence community as a politicized weapon himself. You know, look, I don't think anybody is going to have the answer. The Democrats are going to say Trump's terrible. He's perverting justice. The Republicans are going to say, look, the Democrats did it. They were spying on the Trump administration. They were the ones. So everybody's calling everybody names.
But it isn't just Democrats. Hold on. It isn't. Well, this is what Republican Senator.
Well, which Republican senator?
Let me just read to you what Republican Senator Mitt Romney said about this. He said the firings of multiple inspectors general is unprecedented. Doing so without good cause is a threat to accountable democracy. He is talking about a pattern that many people on the Hill, mostly Democrats, you're right, like Nancy Pelosi, have said is a dangerous pattern of retaliation.
I'm not going to give the one lone senator, Senator Romney, a lot of credibility. I saw him during the transition. He very much wanted to be Trump's Secretary of State. He was not chosen for that. And I think there's been very bad blood personally between the two of them. But let me just finish the point I was trying to make. Let's just wait till the documents come out. I'd rather just wait and make my decision based on the evidence instead of these accusations, really by either side.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Katie McFarland, former Deputy National Security Advisor, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
There's no doubt that democratic elections always quantify a country's political divisions. This will certainly be the case with the next US presidential contest. But what has changed, first gradually and more drastically since Trump entered the political arena, is the nature of the increasingly acrimonious political discourse, a disdain for political norms and institutions. The once profound respect of the American public for the commander-in-chief, for the sanctity of the Oval Office, of Congress, of nonpartisan agencies such as the FBI or the CIA, has quickly melted away. And so, in short, with the current political climate compounded by a deadly pandemic, the question is not who will win the next election, but rather how Trump or Biden will prevail. In a boxing ring, the referee would always ask the contenders to fight clean. Here there will be no such referee, and it remains to be seen how the outcome will be received by the vanquished camp and their supporters. American democracy will be tested like never before. Let us know what you think. But for now, from me and the team here in Washington, D.C., thanks for watching.